good. My name is Kendall Rogers. I'm the division chief for hospital medicine. So I've been here at UNM for about 25 years. I'm a product of the New Mexico education system, graduated from Highland High School, went to UNM, joined the HSC as a biochemistry major. So I've been associated with the HSC for about 25 years. And as I said, I'm now the division chief for hospital medicine. And I'm excited to be here to talk to you today about our history here at UNM. And thank you for the opportunity in talking and gave my duration, and I'm about to explain what we're going to be talking about. So these are my objectives that are required for the CME, so they're in my slide set, and I'm going to skip them and just cut to exactly what my objective in this talk today is. And my main objective is that I want you to be proud of UNM. I want you all to have pride in both where we came from and where we are now. And it's my hope that if you have this pride, that it's going to affect your interactions with patients, it's going to affect your interactions with each other, and hopefully, as it's done for me, it's going to help sustain you in being here at UNM. I also hope to help you focus on what our mission is here and what the mission in Mission Excellence, because I believe if we can focus on what the mission is, that will achieve excellence. I have to give disclosures as well, and my only one is that I'm employed by UNM. But my other disclaimer in this is I'm a physician, and we're going to be talking about a lot of history stuff. And I'm not a historian. This is my first time trying to go back and really from primary sources piece together this history of our hospital. I'm also not a lawyer, and a lot of our history involves talking about things that involve contracts and other things like that. So bear that in mind. And a disclaimer on history is history really is in the eye of the beholder. It kind of depends on who you get your source and who remembers things in certain ways. So keep that in mind. We're going to be focusing on UNM Hospital Maine and the medical school. We're going to be doing more on the distant past, less on recent. We're going to have to skip a ton of details. And we'll do this roughly in a chronological order. And the biggest challenge really was what not to include. I've had to pare this down so much, and it's so painful to cut out these details that took so long to try and find. But my last disclaimer is many of you were here for the history that I'm going to be talking about. And so you may actually know things that I'm getting wrong. And I welcome you to please let me know those things, because we're all still learning about this. So my apologies if I get any details wrong, and please come talk to me after, because this is a work in progress. So I want to start with everyone raising their hand. Audience participation from the beginning. So everybody raise your hand. Great. And everybody who's been here, and keep your hand up. Everybody's got to keep their hands up. Everybody who's been here less than 1 year, lower your hand. And everyone who's been here less than 5 years, lower your hand. Good. Everyone who's been here less than 10 years, lower your hand. Everyone who's been here less than 20 years, lower your hand. Everyone who's been here more than 20 years, stand up. And stay standing. Everyone who's been here less than 30 years, sit down. Okay, so we're here to talk about history. And what we're talking about is what these people have done for our organization. So when you see them and when you run into them, please thank them for their service here. Thank you all. So when I first tried to put together this talk, it was about 3 years ago. It was the 50-year anniversary for the School of Medicine. It was the 60-year anniversary for the hospital. And I got this idea that I was going to go on a website, and I was going to get all the details, and I was going to put it together in a nice, entertaining way. I thought I'd maybe go to the library, I'd check out the book, and I would just synthesize and summarize it. Well, that book doesn't exist, and I couldn't even get the basic information. I couldn't even find out the dates of the additions that we built in the hospital. So what I had to do is get a subscription to a newspaper catalog from 1885 to 1978, and I had to search for UNM Hospital, BCMC, BCI, and let me let you know, we're in the paper every day. Every day there was a car accident that they were transported to BCI. Every day there was a shooting, for something. So it was really difficult to actually get details about UNM out of the newspaper. So I had to augment that with interviews with Steve, with many of the people that you just saw standing up. And lastly, we have an archive over at the library that has a whole bunch of primary information, lots of committee meeting minutes, and a whole bunch of detail that I had to wade through. And you can't see, but my placeholder is in this stack of files, and I had to keep going over there for almost a year to try to make it through all the information that they had. So here's where we're going to start. We can't talk about UNM Hospital and our medical school without talking about Albuquerque. This is the community that we serve. This is why we're here. So the two cannot be separated anytime that we're talking about it. So we're going to start all the way back at the beginning with the history of Albuquerque. So Albuquerque was founded in 1706. And I'm not going to go through the first 200 years. I'm just going to let you know that it took about 200 years for us to get up to a population of about 15,000 people. And over that 200 years, we were driven by three primary industries. We were driven by railroad, we were driven by ranching, and by mining. That was the growth of New Mexico. But there was a fourth industry that really shaped New Mexico and Albuquerque in particular. So we had railroad, ranching, mining, and our fourth was coughing and spitting. Coughing and spitting is talking about tuberculosis. Albuquerque's history is intertwined with the treatment of tuberculosis. In the 1800s, tuberculosis was the leading cause of death in the United States. 150,000 people per year were dying. For every patient who died, we had around 10 to 20 that still had the early stages of the disease. So, back in the 1800s, we had very limited options to treat tuberculosis. The prescription was pretty simple. These patients needed to rest. These patients needed fresh air, and this was proven. High altitude, dry weather did much better, and patients could recover through this. They needed ample good food. This was known as white plague. It was known as consumption. The patients withered away. They lost all of their muscle and fat, so they needed to have access to good nutrition. And they needed to avoid depression. They needed to have a positive attitude. So the environment that they were in was very important. And Albuquerque is perfect for this. Albuquerque had the high altitude, the dryness, the sunshine to keep people happy. And we began advertising for this. We were the heart of well country. And we were on the railroad. And we really encouraged people to come to Albuquerque. And come they did. It's estimated at the turn of the century, 1/3 of people in New Mexico had tuberculosis. And they brought their spouses, they brought their children with them when they came here, and many of them got better and stayed here and formed our community. Mayor Tingley, many of the people that you hear about, these were all people who had TB and then stayed in Albuquerque. But it didn't just bring patients, it brought nurses, it brought doctors, it brought entrepreneurs who were willing to build on this. So this industry brought many people who built our city. And the sanatorium sprung up everywhere. Central Avenue, which was known as Railroad Avenue, was also known as Sans Row. It had about 20 sanatoriums along Central Avenue. And these are what they looked like. They were open doors, open windows. They left them open all year. They really encouraged patients to be out and breathing this air. They encouraged outdoor activities. And Albuquerque was perfect for all of these. As we get into the 1920s and 1930s, we were almost overrun with tuberculosis patients, and this really being our primary industry. We had Santa Fe Railroad, and we had treatment of tuberculosis that was driving the Albuquerque economy, to the point that you can see our advertisements start to change. This is Sunshine and Health in Albuquerque. And the text in this one said, don't come to Albuquerque if you're broke, as a last resort, or if you're expecting to get well in a week, and that we don't invite indigent or hopeless cases. So you start to see that even our language started to change due to this. But to show the prominence that Albuquerque had in the treatment of tuberculosis, a new professional society that was focused on this wasn't formed in Boston, it wasn't formed in Philadelphia. In August of 1935, the American College of Chest Physicians was formed here in Albuquerque when it had its first meeting here. So that shows what prominence we had and the expertise that we had. So how are we doing with tuberculosis? Well, the average length of stay was 9 months. That would look pretty good compared to our graphs. Not saying that we're worse than that. I mean, our graphs would look good compared to that. Our average hospital mortality was 25%, and the mortality at 5 years was 50%. And that all changed in 1944 with the development of streptomycin, followed by isoniazid in 1952. And then we had a treatment for TB. And that really stopped this huge flow of patients that we had coming into Albuquerque. But we had built an entire industry around this. We had buildings, we had workers, and it formed a huge impact on our economy. This was Methodist Sanatorium that didn't survive the switch. But every recent and currently existing healthcare organization in Albuquerque had its birth in tuberculosis. St. Joseph's was a sanatorium at the turn of the century, and of course now is Lovelace. And Lovelace, Dr. Randolph William Lovelace, came to New Mexico in 1906 after he himself had gotten tuberculosis when he was a medical intern. He came here to be treated, and then he stayed, and with Dr. Lassiter, they formed the Lovelace Clinic that lasted for 100 years based off of the Mayo Clinic model. Presbyterian, Reverend Hugh Albert Cooper came here in 1903 as a patient with tuberculosis. He recovered, and he founded the Presbyterian Sanatorium. Presbyterian Sanatorium in the 1930s switched to providing health care and has grown over that time. But UNM as well, our location is due to tuberculosis. In 1932, the Indian Health Services opened the Albuquerque Indian Sanatorium. And as you can see, the building that's still there, and the other two buildings that are still there. And Lomas looks a bit different in this one, but this was the birth of UNM in our current location. In the 1940s, after we had a treatment for tuberculosis, this was converted from the Indian Sanatorium to the U.S. government Indian Hospital that served all of the Southwest. It was a 60-bed hospital. So that brings us up to the 1940s. We have a treatment for tuberculosis, and we have a few other things going on in our community. So what were the needs in Albuquerque in the 1940s? Well, we had growing issues with indigent care and no-pay patients. Surprise! Back in the 1940s, we had a welfare system in the state. Welfare was costing the state about $4,000 in the 1940s. They were paying $8.50 per day that a welfare patient was admitted to a hospital. But the hospitals were coming back and saying, no, it costs $15 a day to care for these patients. Another surprise. Same argument. So all of these hospitals were having a difficulty surviving with the number of indigent patients that they had. At St. Joseph's alone, half of their beds were being used for indigent patients. And we had a 60-bed Indian hospital that was felt to be woefully inadequate for the need that existed. There were no other. Gallup didn't have an Indian hospital at this time. All of these patients were coming to Albuquerque. So we can really find the birth of UNM back on March 4th of 1949 and where our current hospital is. And this occurred first based on legislation that was first passed in 1947 that stated that a county could fund the building of its own hospital, followed by in Bernalillo County that same year by a bond for $1 million to try and build a hospital for indigent care. And that was given to Mr. Cornelius, the chairman of the Bernalillo County Commission, to build a hospital with 100 beds that could serve these indigent patients. And Mr. Hackberg was the superintendent of the United Pueblos Agency, who also had a problem. He had a 60-bed hospital that was inadequate, and he had been charged by the U.S. government to find more access and build a bigger hospital. Now, as search as I may, I could not find any pictures of these two or this historic meeting that took place. So, taking my liberties to imagine what this may have looked like. So these two came together, And one of them saying, I'm charged with building a 100-bed hospital, and the other saying, I'm also charged with building a 100 hospital. And they took minutes of this meeting, and it's the first discussion that we had related to a joint hospital. 3 days later, they were joined by Mr. Hintz, who was the director of the state welfare program. And in the minutes from that note, they came to the Indian Hospital grounds. They looked at where they thought this hospital could be built, and their minutes specifically stated that they also believed a medical school could be built here. So from the first discussions that took place about this hospital, there was an education discussion as well. So they formed a hospital board in 1949. It included the son of Dr. Lovelace. It included many prominent people here in Albuquerque, and they began lobbying senators in Washington to try to get the federal funding that they needed for this joint hospital. So on October 5th of 1949, the Congress passed Public Law 321, and that transferred the land that the Indian Hospital was on to Bernalillo County for the construction of a joint hospital. And this was that Public Law Act, just stating that for no cost, this was going to be transferred from the Department of the Interior over to Bernalillo County. On October 19th, Senate Resolution 2404 passed in Congress. So Senate Resolution 2404 is known as the Albuquerque Hospital Bill. And the Albuquerque Hospital Bill stated that there'd be a federal contribution of $1.5 million towards this hospital, that it would be a joint hospital, but that 100 beds would be available to Indians at all times when that was required. The government also guaranteed that they were going to pay for 80 of those beds on a per diem basis to help in the maintenance of this hospital, even if all of those beds weren't being used. So it was providing a source of funds to maintain the hospital. And then it built off of the public law and stated that that previously designated land would be used for this. But as all of us remember from the cartoons, for a bill to become a law, we have one additional step. And this bill was sent to President Truman. So, seems this story would just go with this being signed and enacted, but one day after it was sent to President Truman, a letter was sent to the president from the All Pueblo Council, asking him to veto the bill. So this is a good time for us to step back and think about what a monumental venture that this was. We're talking 1949, and throughout the United States, we had primarily segregated hospitals. Throughout the entire South, and even in the North, they hadn't finished desegregating hospitals at this point. So, the Native American community was very aware of this, and they were very concerned that if a hospital was built, that they were going to segregate the Native Americans to a separate part of the hospital to get a lower quality of care, that their funds would go towards paying for an indigent population who would receive a higher level of care. And they wanted to be sure that there would be no discrimination in this hospital to Native Americans. And all of that had been addressed to begin with. All these discussions had taken place, and they had written a contract guaranteeing that there would be no discrimination. But this bill went to the floor of the House and to Congress, and in closed sessions, without any documentation of this, all of those protections for Native Americans were stripped from the bill. And they were stripped from the bill by Southern legislators who didn't want this to be set as a precedent for future federal funding for hospitals. So they sent the bill back with none of that. And of course, when the All Pueblo Council saw that, that caused concern. So the county commissioners set up a meeting, and they met. Well, first they sent a letter to President Truman trying to say, look, we were aware of this. We want to provide these protections. We told them, they urged him to sign the bill. They then set up a meeting with the All Pueblo Council. They described all of this. They went into a binding agreement with them. And on October 27th, the chairman of the All Pueblo Council wrote President Truman and asked for a passage of the bill. And what he said was, although disappointed about the elimination of the anti-discrimination section, that they did support this. And he listed a long history of broken promises cannot be easily erased from Indian memory, but they didn't want to obstruct what they saw was a need within this community, and so they supported it. And with that, President Truman signed the Albuquerque Hospital Bill on October 31st of 1949, and he wrote this statement specifically related to it. And I just want to highlight this portion. He wrote, "I wish to express my approval for the basic objective of this legislation, which is to encourage the integration of hospital facilities for the care of Indians and non-Indians in the same community. He wrote that he regretted that in the last days of the recent session of Congress that they saw fit to delete from the bill without discussion on the floor the provisions that would have guaranteed complete protection of Indian patients against discriminatory practices. And he stated, and this is pretty humbling to hear President Truman stating this about Albuquerque. I was surprised to even see where we were. I've given my approval to this message, fully confident in accomplishing the desirable objectives of this legislation. Fair and equal treatment will be accorded to all patients of this hospital. So at this point, with the signing by President Truman, we had what we needed to build a hospital. We had funds, 1.5 from the federal government, 1 million from Bernalillo County. We had land to build this hospital on, and we had funds to maintain the hospital. First, through federal funding for 80 beds on a per diem basis, and then we had passed a mill levy in Bernalillo County to help support these services. That brings us into the 1950s. Our hospital board was hard at work, and the product of their work was the 1952 contract. And that's what you'll commonly hear us talk about, the 1952 contract. So let's look at the provisions that were written, because what they tried to do in this contract is build back all of those things that were taken out of the original bill. So I understand that you guys are not going to be able to read any of this, so allow me to read it to you. They first restated that 100 beds would be available for Native Americans. They stated that they wanted the hospital built in accordance with the American Hospital Association. They wanted to make sure it was a high-quality hospital. They guaranteed this was a binding contract between the U.S. government, the County of Bernalillo, and the Board of Trustees for this new hospital. And the county was agreeing that they would turn over the funds of the mill levy to help support the hospital. They also stated that if anything was broken or violated from this contract, that Indian Health Services or the commissioner could come in and take over control of the hospital. And they stated that this contract was perpetually binding into the future, regardless of how many successor changes there were in the hospital. But this is the section that was most important at this time. They wrote that they wanted first guaranteed priority for Indians, and that they wanted no distinction shall ever be made in the admission, accommodation, or treatment of patients in or in connection with the hospital on the basis of race, religion, color, language, or otherwise, that no segregation of patients would take place, that all persons entitled to admission, accommodation, or treatment in connection with the hospital shall be admitted, accommodated, and treated in the same manner with equality and without discrimination of any nature whatsoever. So this is 1952, and if that language sounds familiar, it should sound familiar, because almost the same language shows up in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, where the Civil Rights Act stated that all persons should be entitled to full and equal enjoyment without discrimination or segregation on the ground of race, color, religion, or national origin. So 12 years preceding the Civil Rights Act, we had this language in the founding document of our hospital. Of course, desegregation didn't happen in hospitals until the passage of Medicare, which was in 1965, because the 1964 Civil Rights Act had no teeth to it. But once Medicare was passed, then they could withhold federal funding. So our hospital had already been in existence for 10 years at that point, 11 years by the passage of Medicare, and that's really something that we should be proud of. But then we have a question of, well, did we discriminate? Well, there is a patient population that we discriminated against. They were called paying patients. Patients that had money. We discriminated against. We stated in the original document, patients that are able to pay for the full cost of services were eligible for admission only if a service was not available elsewhere in the community, or in the event of a shortage of facilities, or in the case of emergency. So we have this basis from the beginning, and of course our hospital board was made of people from these other hospitals, and their primary goal was decreasing indigent patients. So Bernalillo County Hospital opened October 26th of 1954. This was our beginning photo, and to show the level of research I've been into for this talk, I found this postcard on eBay and bought it, which was our Indian hospital and they stated, the Bernalillo County Indian Hospital, here in this beautiful new building, New Mexico has created for its Indian citizenry one of the most modern hospitals in the state. And that was true. It was the most modern hospital. It was also the largest hospital in New Mexico. And this is what it looked like. These were our OR suites right after opening. We had radiology. We had a conveyor belt in the cafeteria, which I thought I heard might still be there. We had the nursery. We had ENT suites. Our patient floors, if you can see in the bottom right, had 4 patients in each room. But nice beds, nice furnishings, and that was our hospital when it first opened. And it was really at that point, the opening of our hospital, that our clinical mission was born here at UNM. But I would argue that we had twins that day. And for anyone who doesn't know, these are Charlie Pizanases, one of my hospitalist twins. But at the same time that our clinical mission was born, our education mission was born. It was discussed at the outset. And as soon as the hospital opened, we started into negotiations to become accredited for postgraduate education here at UNM. And in 1956, our 6 first interns arrived at BCI. So we were accredited in 1955, they arrived in 1956, but not only medical, the same year we went into an agreement with UNM that their new nursing school could have nurses rotate at this hospital. And we also had a clinical training program for medical technologists. So our hospital had learners in it almost from the outset. And I'm going to talk about one of these learners as an example. This is our first intern to arrive at UNM. He arrived a month before everyone else. His name was Tom Downing. He was 44 years old, and his story is similar to even some of our medical students today. He first went to UNM in 1931 and got a degree, and he became a truck driver for New Mexico Steel Company. And he worked in that company for 10 years, and he bought the company. And his brother returned from the war, and he had this burning desire to be a doctor. So he turned over New Mexico Steel Company to his brother, and he went back to night classes at UNM to take his pre-med courses. He took all of his pre-med courses and was accepted at the University of Colorado. He did his medical school at the University of Colorado, and then he came back to BCI for his internship and residency because he wanted to practice in New Mexico. His roots were here. He took his family with him on all of these changes. And the interesting thing about Tom Downing is that he is illustrative of what our education issues were at the time. New Mexico didn't have a medical school, so we had an agreement. We were part of WICHE. We could send our residents to medical schools in states that existed, and the state would help pay for them. We would pay $2,000 per student to go to a medical school somewhere else with the hope that they would come back. At its peak, we had 52 New Mexico residents in medical schools in other places, $100,000. That was actually a deal for us. That was better than paying for a medical school, and it could have perpetuated if it wasn't for Tom Popejoy. And Popejoy was the dean of UNM and really believed that we are not going to meet the medical needs of New Mexico if we don't have our own medical school. And he started all of the initial groundwork to plan for a medical school. And at the same time, we had a medical staff working in the hospital that also embraced this idea. And the president of the Bernalillo County Indian Medical Staff, in their minutes, stated that he believed BCI represented an institution ideally situated for graduate and postgraduate education. And he proposed that BCI could be the teaching hospital for this new medical school. And that brings us into the 1960s. So, our medical school was founded by state legislation in 1961. And in 1961, we went out and found our first dean, which was Reginald Fitz. Dr. Fitz came from a family of medical school deans. His grandfather was a dean of a medical school. His grandfather coined the terms appendicitis and pancreatitis. His father was dean of Harvard Medical School. So when Dr. Fitz came, he was following his legacy, although he was the first to start a medical school. And when UNM was in its planning stages, and even through much of the 1960s, it was affectionately known as the Harvard on the Rio Grande, due to the planning that was taking place at that point. So, as soon as this was formed, they pulled the house staff in to the School of Medicine, and they really consider this to be the first. They list this as the first Bernalillo County Indian Hospital house staff under the new medical school. Of course, they had been here for 6 years already. In 1963, UNM and the Board of Trustees of BCI entered into an agreement that BCI would be the teaching and research hospital, that UNM School of Medicine would nominate members to the medical staff, and we established a closed medical staff at that point. And in 1964, our first class of students started. They started in a 2-year medical school, but we had the clinical experience for them that they needed in their 3rd and 4th year. And before this class graduated, it became a 4-year school, and they finished all of their education at Bernalillo County Indian Hospital. And with the graduation of the first class in the first year, we had our first name change, where they didn't feel that Bernalillo County Indian Hospital fully encompassed the work that was being done and what the mission of the hospital was at that point. And out of 35 names, they chose Bernalillo County Medical Center. And though lots of other things were going on in 1969, we made the front page. BCI given a new name, BCMC, and they stated that they felt that, one, we described the area that we were treating, and they felt that the words medical center showed an affiliation with the School of Medicine, and that was their reasoning for choosing BCI. Soon after that, with the medical school, there was a discussion all through the 1970s of whether the state should buy BCMC. It was unusual for a medical school to be associated with a county hospital. And so these debates took place for almost 6 years about whether BCMC should be run by the state rather than by the county. And in 1978, it was decided that it would stay a county hospital, but we entered into the 1978 lease, which stated a 20-year lease that's been renewed and slightly modified, but I'm just going to go through this one instead of all the reiterations. The university is going to pay rent at $1 per year. Love to see that check. That would be really interesting. The UNM assumes full responsibility for operating and maintaining the hospital, but this agreement obligated the county to pay over county funds for the operation and maintenance of the county hospital. Similar to what sounds like is going on right now with our memo of understanding to try to get those funds from the mill levy. And with this decision for UNM to take over control of operations at UNM, in 1979 we had our name changed from BCMC to the University of New Mexico Hospital. So since that time, we've accomplished a lot as an institution. And there's no way I could do justice to everything that we've accomplished in that time. But in our 2 primary missions, just to give a scope of the things that we've done, this last year we had 93,000 ER visits, we had 500,000 outpatient visits, 7,000 trauma cases. We provide specialized care to the entire state, and we're known nationally for our telehealth and for Project Echo. In our education missions, we enter 1,000 patients into our MD nursing, MP, pharmacy, population health, dental, and biomedical research programs. And Popejoy was right. 40% of the physicians who are practicing in New Mexico right now graduated from UNM Medical School. So his goal of increasing the supply of medical physicians in New Mexico was met. And of course, we have a research mission with $165 million in grant funding. But we've had a lot of challenges over that time. Challenges that existed then and still exist today. We've had these expanding missions that we just talked about. The most obvious one started at the very beginning, which was this push and pull between a clinical mission and an education mission. And launched on top of that was this expanding clinical mission that continues to expand to this day. We care for more and more patients of different specialized care that only we offer. And there was a big debate about whether we could accomplish these goals. It was stated, can a hospital serve both an indigent population and teach? And according to Albert Sims, no. He stated, we're trying to run a university teaching hospital and a county hospital, and we've just proved beyond a doubt that it can't be done. And this was 40 years ago. And we're still here. But this is something we struggle with to this day. Now, I have some really shocking news for everyone. But we have some financial issues. And we've had financial issues since our hospital, I'd like to say since it was built, but no, we had financial issues before the hospital got built. They had to scale back the initial project, go back to the taxpayer, and get an additional bond for $750,000, even to get the hospital built in 1952, after all of these other things were approved. And since that time, this hasn't changed. Through the decades, we've continued to have things that have made our financial hardships more difficult. And a lot of times we responded to those with increases in the mill levy in 1955, 1962. We had another. The U.S. government pulled out of their contract with us. Gallup built an Indian hospital. They didn't need this 80 guaranteed beds in Albuquerque. So President Eisenhower, we got it through Congress, but President Eisenhower vetoed the bill that would have kept our 80-bed guarantee. And we went up to a mill levy of around 4.5%, and about 50% of our operating budget was by the mill levy in the early 1960s. And we've seen opposition and we've seen financial challenges all the way through every decade till today. So this isn't anything new for us as an organization. This is 2016, but we could pull any headline from right now, seeing these same challenges. The other main challenge that we've had is meeting the need of our community, and that really comes down to our capacity. This is tangible to every one of us every day. So we've had to come up with really inventive ways to try to meet capacity. We haven't tried hammocks and slings yet, but we could get there. So let's go through a timeline to understand our expansion to try and meet this need within the hospital. So I hope you can see this is an aerial view of our campus. I've got a timeline at the top, and now I have an arrow from 1932 pointing to the original Indian hospital that's still there. 1954, we opened the original BCI hospital, which is still there, all the way through 5 Middle, 4 West, 5 East, all of the east sides. That's our 1954 building. But we've always had capacity issues. So if anyone wondered if we've ever sent patients from the ED up to inpatient halls, yes, we have, and we put it in the paper. So this is when our hospital was overcrowded, and we moved pediatric patients up into the hallways of the inpatient floor in 1966. And in 1970, we added 100 beds. This is the 5 West, the ORs, that whole part of the building. When you walk out of 5 Middle or 4 West, you're walking in to our 1970 building, and our ORs are part of our 1970 building. And this is it when it was being built. We also built an emergency department at the front of it. We weren't just trying to do capacity. I loved this article. In the 1970s, to read something that says, physician staffing clinics or residents, and many are faculty, their aim is to treat as many patients as possible without admitting them to the hospital, thus keeping costs down while increasing service. In the 1970s, we were trying to come up with ways to keep people out of the hospital. This is so much different than what many other hospitals were doing around that time. So we've always had this capacity issue. But the demand didn't end. It continued through the 1970s. So in 1976, we built the North Tower, the South Tower. So the South Tower was 7 floors. It was planned to be 4 floors. We needed 4 clinical floors. But the medical school didn't have room. We needed faculty office. So the School of Medicine went into a condo lease agreement with the hospital, and they added 3 floors to the proposal that was there for adding 4 clinical floors. And so the 7-floor tower was built, and the top 3 floors were faculty offices. And then in 1985, we added what was considered our critical care wing. And this tripled our ER space, expanded both of our ICUs, separated the medical and surgical ICUs. And you can see this off to the side. And the reason for showing this is this is the only part of our hospital that we've torn down over time. We didn't tear all of it down, we just tore kind of the wings off for building the pavilion. But it was believed that this was not a well-designed part of the building. Sorry for anesthesia or anyone currently in there. But this was kind of the frowned upon area, that it was not built to the same level that those others were built. And then in 1991, we added our ambulatory care clinics, and we moved the faculty offices out of the South Tower into the ACC, and then we backfilled those as clinical. So this also added inpatient capacity as well. And then, of course, many of us were here by the show of hands in 2007 when we built the pavilion. Beautiful thing. And then many of us remember around 2010 starting all of our planning, and thank goodness in 2015 we built our adult acute care hospital in Lance West. What didn't happen in 2015, and I'll just update this slide at some point in the future. Someone send me an email and we'll get this slide updated for the future. So we've always had our capacity issues, but now are the challenges that we're all here for. And we just heard them from Dr. Richards and Dr. Roth. We're here for our quality and safety issues that we're having within the hospital. All of us know that we're not at the point that we would expect us to be. We don't think this is reflective of the care. It's not why we came here. And it's threatening our clinical mission as well. We have poor student evaluations based on what they're observing in our clinical environment. So this is an obvious challenge that we have to meet head on. On top of that, also discussed what is our provider and staff satisfaction. And we summarize a lot of this as ease of practice. And to put it bluntly, it's hard to care for patients at UNM. It's tough. It takes tremendous effort. And it shouldn't be that way. And that really brings us to mission excellence. How is mission excellence going to get us from where we currently are to where we're hoping to be and where we all feel that we deserve to be and where we want this institution to go? And I would hope that we can accomplish excellence by focusing on our mission. So we just went through this lengthy history related to our mission, and it's a noble mission that was initially started. The best summary that I found of this was in the 1964 medical staff minutes of the medical staff of then BCI, and they stated, as a specific matter referring to morale and attitude, the professional staff strongly believes that the hospital must be pervaded by the belief that all patients, regardless of means or origin, must be provided with a single high quality of care, and that is the mission and dedication of the hospital as a service group in society to help people who are sometimes unappreciative, unclean, and invariably sick. And that states what our mission is. Our mission was to care for all of these patients regardless. And that's a noble mission. We treat all patients equally. And that was great, and we should be proud of that then. But now we need something more. We need to do more than just treat all patients equally. Many other hospitals have come on board with that. And where we need to go from treating all patients equally is caring for all patients. And I don't use caring as a synonym for treating. It's not enough to treat our patients. We need to care about our patients. Dr. Peabody, in The Caring Physician, stated, "The secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient." Now I'm talking to an audience that hopefully I wouldn't have to convince any of you that you should care about your patients. We care about our patients. Likely, all of us came into this because we cared about patients. But even the best of us, that initial drive of caring has been tarnished. And it's been changed. And I hate to say it, but there are people within our organization who actually almost seem to have contempt for our patients or see them as the enemy. They're the ones causing this burden and pain that they're having. And we have to move away from that. So I first want to define what caring looks like, and then we'll talk about how we can get there. So I have lots of examples of what I could say caring looks like in our hospital. But on Tuesday, I received a letter that was written to one of my hospitalists, and I thought that this summarized caring better than any of my other examples. This was written to Dr. Justin Rush from the daughter of a patient that we cared for at UNM. And I want to tell you from the beginning, her mom didn't make it. Her mom died in our hospital after 8 days of being treated here. And this is the letter that she wrote to Dr. Rush after. She wrote, "I was so incredibly touched by your voicemail regarding the passing of my mom. My sister and I actually wondered if any of the doctors that she had previously seen would be aware that she had passed. I can't begin to tell you how much it means to me to know that you not only noticed, but took the time to make a phone call to express your condolences. We too were very surprised by the sudden turn of events in her health. I left the hospital just an hour to go check out the rehab facility, and she took a turn for the worse while I was gone. When I got back, they told me that she needed to be intubated so that she could breathe. I second-guessed every decision that was made from that time until the time that she passed a few hours later, wondering if there was anything I could have changed to achieve a different outcome. I can't thank you enough for the kindness you have shown, both while she was in the hospital and now. My sister and I felt that we finally had someone advocating for her, and your bedside manner with my mom touched us all. There are others at the hospital that blessed me during her final hours, but because of the circumstances, I can't remember their names." She stated, "The resident that made rounds with you was exceedingly kind. She held my hand, offered comfort and reassurance when they intubated my mom. She stayed with me until they had my mom settled in the medical ICU. The medical ICU resident on duty cried with me when my mom passed. She hugged and comforted me when I left. The male MICU nurse assigned to my mom gently helped me wash her face and hair after she had passed. I will remember your kindness for the rest of my life." This is what caring looks like. These are the actions and behaviors that show that we care about our patients. Holding hands, offering comfort, staying with patients, crying with them, hugging them, cleaning them up after they've passed away, listening to them. A provider making a phone call to express their condolences for a patient that they weren't even caring for at that particular time. Those are acts of caring. But what else? What else does caring look like? Well, caring looks like respecting our patients, respecting their time, acknowledging them when we come into the room, telling them how long we think that something is going to be taking, introducing ourselves so that they know who we are. If this sounds familiar, it should, because this is aided. This is a method of showing that we care for our patients. It's what we would expect from anyone else if they cared about us. It also is seeing someone lost in a hallway and stopping and seeing if they need something. It's greeting people as you pass them. If this sounds familiar, it should. It's the 10-5 rule. Each of these are not empty procedures for people to go through. They're not empty tasks for people to do. They're methods to show that we care for our patients. And even those that don't care for our patients can show the behaviors that express caring. And that's what our expectation needs to be for everyone who works here. But I want to take this a step further, because many of us can say, yeah, I've got examples of all of that. I care for our patients. But the real mission in our hospital is for caring for all of our patients, not just the one that reminds you of your grandfather or the one that you had some connection with. We can all think of the patients that are really difficult to care for. And that's what's special about UNM, is it's our ability to care for all of those patients. Even the nice patients are difficult sometimes. We're meeting them when they're sick, they're tired, they're not at their best. We meet patients when they are at their most vulnerable. But the kicker to that is that these patients are meeting our staff and our providers when they're at their most vulnerable. Because our staff are working in an environment that's so difficult that it's hard for them to make the effort to care. Caring takes work. You have to be in the right mindset and not just thinking about your own hardships and frustrations to start caring about someone else. And our staff walk through our hospital carrying the burdens of all of these challenges that we just listed. And in that scene, it is very difficult for them to show the caring that we expect of them. Imagine what our staff could do if we freed them from these burdens where they could actually focus on the care of their patients. And this is where I want to talk for a moment about the people who work at UNM. We have a special type of person who works at UNM. They are someone who must believe in our mission because they're making sacrifices to be here and work towards it. And they've likely done that through two methods. One, they care so much that they're willing to make the sacrifices and they're willing to struggle through it each day. And then there's a smaller portion of people who have survived by learning to care less. And that's how they've managed within this system. And our goal as leaders is to find those people who have the trait that they really could care for all of our patients. Because not everyone can do this. That's what's difficult about this. We have to find and cultivate those people and reward those people. And we also have to find the ones who are incapable of this and direct them, either intervene or direct them to another place that may match their priorities better. What does this mean for us as leaders? Well, Richard Branson said the way you treat your employees is the way that they will treat your customers. This is an easy jump to how we treat our providers and staff is how they will treat our patients. And right now, we're not treating each other or our patients the best way that all of us know that we could. And that must mean that we're not treating them the way that they need to be. So this is a room of leaders. And so let's talk about how does a leader spread caring? Well, the primary mission, your primary goal, is removing those barriers from your staff that will allow them to do this work. But it also means role modeling. That one's obvious. But here comes some that should also sound familiar. It means listening to your staff, identifying what those barriers are, rewarding them for the things that they're doing right. This is through a process called rounding. This is where we make a connection with our frontline staff so we can identify their burdens, try to remove them, and so that we can recognize them for the work that they're doing. And that is our mission. That's what we should be doing within the organization. And that's our lot as leaders within the organization. And that brings us to mission excellence. Mission excellence is the tool that we are hoping to utilize to enable our leaders to allow our staff to become the people that they came here to be. Our logo for Mission Excellence, and I don't know how often we've shown this, but from the beginning that we chose those words, our logo was, "We care for New Mexico." And that's a lofty goal. That's a lofty goal to try to care for everyone who's in New Mexico. But it's one that we can achieve. So I would say let's remember where it is that we came from. We came from a noble cause. We had a noble mission from the very beginning. But our future should embrace an even better mission and concept. One that likely all of us hoped for when we came here, and one that we can achieve as a group. So I thank you for letting me be here today to talk about the history, and enjoy the rest of the conference.